This is a presentation of Chalk Talks, presented by the Playing for Power Project.
Title IX is a law that requires schools to treat girls and boys fairly. Before watching this video, I never really understood that before Title IX was passed, most women in the United States did not have the same opportunities that I do. Listening to these women tell their stories made me appreciate my opportunities even more. After you watch it, I think that you will feel the same way.
Before Title IX, the rules for girls were similar to the rules for black people. Black people were segregated and not allowed to do certain things, just like girls were segregated and not allowed to do certain things. I'm very lucky because I am black and I am a girl. I'm allowed to participate in anything I want, attend any college I want, and be treated fairly in my clubs and organizations. But as you will learn from the woman in this video, it wasn't always that way.
One of the things I look forward to in middle school is being able to participate in organized sports like track, swimming, soccer, and basketball. I cannot imagine not being able to participate in a sport or a club just because I am a girl.
Thanks to Title IX, I get to play too.
Before the regulations for Title IX were written, life for women in U.S. colleges and universities was markedly different from what it is today. Women had limited choices regarding which universities they could attend. Additionally, many of the schools that did admit women did so on a restricted basis. And once they were in college, they were often guided away from academic fields that society believed to be inappropriate for women.
In the state of Virginia, in the early 1960s, there were 21,000 women who were refused admission, rejected, from all of the state schools and colleges in Virginia. At the same time, would anyone like to guess how many men were rejected? Not a single man was rejected, and 21,000 women were. And I've often wondered what happened to those 21,000 women. A lot of schools had, professional schools particularly, as well as undergraduate schools, but particularly professional schools had quotas for women. Many medical schools would take 5 women, 7 women, 10 women. All the quotas that I've ever heard of were under 20. Cornell Veterinary School of Medicine, for example, would take 2 women every year. No matter how many applied, no matter how smart they were. Veterinary schools now have something, I haven't checked recently, but I think it's like 60–70% of the students are now female, because they're admitting students not on the basis of their sexual reproductive organs, but on the basis of their accomplishments and achievements.
I graduated from high school in 1973, the year after Title IX was passed. I also grew up in New York City, where people thought that debate was a sport, or chess, for example. So I had very little exposure growing up, both because of where I was from and because of the time period, to athletics opportunities or to other opportunities that Title IX has since provided to girls and women in school. I recall very distinctly the expectation that my strengths and interests would lie in the liberal arts and the humanities, and that math and science would not be fields in which I would be either interested or in which I could excel. And looking back, while I internalized those kinds of communications and felt that it was all about my own weaknesses, I now realize that this was a message that too many young women of my generation were getting, and that Title IX has helped to change.
Almost all facets of college women's lives were affected by some sort of sex-based restrictions. These restrictions included eligibility for athletics and academic scholarships, rules in residence halls, and differential expectations regarding marital status.
There were no athletic scholarships for girls, except in some traditionally black schools for girls and young women. Many schools had separate rules for men and women. For example, at the University of Maryland, men's dormitories had maid service. Women's dormitories did not have maid service. Now, that's not a big deal, but it's important. Why should the women have to clean their rooms and take more time doing it? Of course, they didn't give the women maid service when they made it equal. They just got rid of it, so the women still had to clean their own rooms. But now the men did too, and so it was equal. Many schools, women had to be in early. Men could, at night, they had to be in by 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. Men could stay out all night or had a later time frame. Many places, women had to live in dormitories. Men could live in cheaper housing off campus. Many scholarships were restricted to men. Many of the better scholarships were restricted to men. The scholarships, when they were not restricted, often they gave them the graduate level, and this happened to me once. I didn't get a scholarship that was really important, and I wanted one. It was very prestigious, and so I asked, well, why didn't I get it? Because they'd given it to a guy, and they said, well, he's married. And I said, but I'm married too. Not understanding the implication was he's married, he needs the money to support his family.
Access to some high school and college courses was based on gender. For example, at some high schools, girls took home economics, which was not open to boys. Boys took shop, which was not open to girls. Also, boys and girls were often given different duties in the school. A culture was created and supported where girls and boys had different expectations, opportunities, and experiences.
My own daughter, when she was learning to drive, thought it would be really good to learn about auto mechanics because she was driving and she thought that would be a good thing to know. And so she asked if she could take the course, and they immediately said, no, you can't take the course. And she said, why? She says, girls aren't allowed to take it. She told me this, and I called the school. This is before Title IX, so you don't have any weapon to say, hey, this is illegal. You're dependent on their goodwill. And I say, my daughter would like to take this course. And they say, well, she can't because she's a girl. And I say, why not? And then there's a pause, and he says, well, they wear special uniforms to keep their clothes clean, and there's no bathroom in the auto mechanics laboratory area for the girls to change their clothes. And I'm thinking this is logical, and I say, oh, okay, so she could change her clothes in the hallway, use one of the bathrooms that she uses for other purposes, and that would be okay. And then there was this long pause, and he said, ma'am. And when anyone's addressing you as ma'am in this kind of situation, it's not good. He said, ma'am, you don't know the language that these boys use. And I knew I wasn't going to win, but I thought to myself, and these days if it happened, I would have said, you don't know the language my daughter uses. But she never did get to take the course, and that would, of course, be illegal under Title IX. There were 3 things I wanted to do in school. I wanted to run the slide projector. We had slide projectors, and I wanted to be able to do that. This was so long ago, we had ink wells with real ink in our desks, and you had to go down to the basement with a big bottle and fill it up with ink, and then you got to pour the ink in everybody's little inkwell on their desk, and I wanted to do that in the worst way. And the last thing I wanted to do is I wanted to be a crossing guard. And all of those 3 things were restricted to boys, and I never got to do them at all.
In most parts of the country, there were few organized sport opportunities for girls, regardless of their skill. Consequently, girls could not reasonably aspire to the highest level of athletic achievement.
I've got this big void where boys my age, where men my age, when they were boys, have stories to tell. I've got nothing. Does that make me sad? No. It was the way it was. And it makes me so happy now of how things have changed. And to be able to watch history change and live it as I have, I don't mind at all. But there's nothing there. There's no memory of the soccer team when I was 7 or 8. There was no soccer team. There was nothing for girls. And so when I go back and want to pick up a memory before high school in sports, it was me shooting baskets by myself on the driveway or playing tennis with my friends, tennis lessons and all of that. But there were no team sports, and there are no memories. And that's the very real fact of how girls were treated in sports in the 60s and early 70s.
I really did want to be a pitcher for the New York Yankees. After I came home from school every day from the age of 5 to the age of 11, when I tried out for Little League Baseball, I threw 500 pitches against the side of my parents' garage. And by the time I was 11, I had a rising fastball, I had a curve that would break off the table. I was working on a Bob Turley drop, and only those people with no hair or gray hair know who Bob Turley was. But I really thought I could be a professional baseball player. And it wasn't until I was denied the right to play Little League Baseball that I learned the only hope was to learn how to pitch upside down and play softball.
In 1974, Margaret Dunkel conducted the first national study of inequities that women were facing in athletics in U.S. colleges. The study was conducted through the Association of American Colleges and Universities.
Everyone who's ever seen that paper has been stunned. It was published in 74. The regulation doesn't come out till 75. But it discovered so many awful inequities that no one, I think, had even realized. Things like women having to pay for their own uniforms or getting the men's old uniforms. Women having no budget for, women gymnasts having no budget for athletic tape to protect their elbows, their ankles, their knees, or whatever, or their hands, wrists. And so the men would give the women their used, sweaty, grungy athletic tape. Special food tables for male athletes, none for women athletes. Women athletes, 2 or 4 in a room, male athletes always having their own beds. Women having the worst practice hours, like at 6 a.m. or 10 o'clock at night, men practicing during the day at 8 o'clock or at 3 o'clock or whatever. Men traveling around in chartered buses or airplanes, women going in their own cars or the coaches' cars. Male coaches being paid, women coaches being volunteers. Coaching courses, often limited to men only.
2 days a week is all we practiced. Because we had the one facility. We had the intramurals had it 2 days a week, and then we had to have, because of the philosophy of the physical education program, we had to have what we called open gym. So the gym was open on Friday and Saturdays, just for the students to go in and play and do whatever they wanted to do. It was during those times that a lot of the women who played volleyball or basketball would get together and work out plays, and you would do things in practice, and they would concentrate and try to work on them during that time. I just do not believe that the young women today have any idea of the foundation that was developed from these people. We call them pioneers when we honored them, because that's what they really were. They just laid a foundation that'll never break.
I think the difference between the men's programs and the women's programs was really in 2 areas. The overall support for the programs, and by that I mean access to facilities, access to training and training rooms, weight rooms, even access if you were injured to get some sort of rehabilitation so you could play. And the second thing, of course, was recognition, because school-wide we weren't really recognized for what we were doing.
Although numerous discrepancies existed, some women did not notice them because of their sheer enjoyment of sport participation. To these women, just having the opportunity to participate was enough.
I don't think we ever felt that we weren't treated right or we were undeserving or that we were slighted. We were just happy to have the opportunity to play in a bigger gym with seats and bleachers, and so it was almost like the big time. But I never felt that we were slighted because we were in the smaller women's gym. We were just excited to have a chance to go to play in Anderson Arena, where the guys had played. But I never felt that as a slight, at least for me personally. I was just excited to have the opportunity to go and play in the larger facility.
Even though we didn't have these things, even though the cheerleaders had better uniforms, even though we had one jersey over 4 years and had to have it washed every night, even though we had to give up our locker room to the visiting boys teams, even though we had the worst practice times, usually we had to come back 7, 8, 9 at night into the gym, often after the junior high boys practiced. Then finally the varsity girls could practice. All of this stuff is so different now. We didn't know what we didn't have. It didn't bother us because we had a chance to play. Just the very act of being able to play was enough for those of us who had never had an organized sport until freshman year of high school.
During these pre-Title IX years, women's athletic programs were low-key, and there were fewer contests for women than for men. Teams at historically black colleges and universities, such as Tennessee State, faced additional challenges, many of which were created by the racial discrimination that existed in the U.S. at that time.
Discrimination for me began even before I got to Tennessee State University because of growing up in the South. But here again, my parents always taught me, do not put yourself in a position where individuals would insult you. You know your place. And sometimes now when I say that, people say, well, what was your place? You knew you were black, first of all. You knew that there were certain rules and regulations that you were not allowed to cross. And so you did not subject yourself to that. As I traveled from my hometown to Tennessee State, the same type of rules and regulations were there. We were not allowed to go to the movies to sit downstairs. If we went to the movies, we had to go around to the back and go up the stairs to sit. We were not allowed to go certain places downtown. One year when we traveled from Nashville to New Jersey, we were not allowed to eat in a restaurant. And, I was very disappointed because I said, we're going up north and it's going to be different. And so here again, it was a lesson that we learned that in those days and times, segregation was segregation wherever you went. And we lived by those rules.
There are many more stories about inequities in pre-Title IX women's athletics. They range from inadequate facilities, to lack of access to athletic trainers, to the necessity to raise travel money, and to relegation to second-class status when it came to varsity letters.
And the women's gym was only a gym. It had no room for bleachers around the outside. It was just the size of a basketball court. And it was what the men had discarded back in the 50s. So I was angry, as were my teammates, when we saw that that was the gym. And then they gave us our uniforms, quote unquote, which were just these red pinnies that we were supposed to put over white t-shirts and red shorts. There was no number on the back, there was no Stanford, there was no name. We had a graduate assistant, one volunteer graduate assistant for a coach. Whereas the men had a full staff of paid coaches. We didn't travel very far, except Northern California, a little bit Nevada, and we had no scholarships.
We also had no trainers other than maybe a student trainer who would come along with us. Sometimes they were pretty gifted. I guess they knew what they were doing, and other times you'd have to stand over them because it's like, oh, no, don't wrap it that way. So we became our own trainers as well, which was another element that we had to learn how to do. When we went to tournaments or we had an overnight, which was unusual except at tournament time, we had 4 people to a room. The women had to share beds. That bothered me a little bit, that we had to force these young women to do that. When we found out for sure that the men only had 2 to a room and they didn't have to share beds. And the idea was, well, the women are smaller than men, so you can have in a double bed,
Recently someone told me, someone who was a phys ed teacher and a coach in those days, and what that woman said, she said she had an injured athlete who hurt her ankle and went to the coach to see maybe the trainer could look at her ankle, and the coach, the male coach, the athletic director or whatever, said, put her foot in the toilet and just keep flushing it. That was they would never say that to a male athlete.
I coached at Purdue and UMass, so these are both teams that do not have really warm seasons for collegiate softball. But I took one team in each school to the National Collegiate Championships at Omaha, Nebraska. And the girls and women of those teams raised their own money for the most part, but one story I always kind of laugh about, my mom and dad gave me sterling silver as gifts for a while during the time that I was in graduate school, and I think they were trying to push me towards getting married. Here's your trousseau. We're putting this together for you. I had all this silver, the serving pots and the this and then that, and when it came time for my softball team to raise money to go to Nebraska, unbeknownst to my parents, I auctioned off their silver that they had given me, so that that became part of the money that we used for all the women to get to Omaha.
I was a huge Michigan football fan, and literally living and dying with Michigan football and with Bo Schembechler's teams, and crying when they lost to Ohio State. Just killed me. being in Toledo, you know, we look north. And so this huge, I mean, as a senior in high school, I'm in tears when Michigan lost 21-14 to Ohio State in 1975. And I was at the game in Ann Arbor. So, I mean, I love Bo Schembechler. I love the Michigan Wolverines. Move ahead 10 years. Bo Schembechler now is the athletic director also at Michigan, and he is quoted as saying that women athletes at Michigan, I didn't go to Michigan, but women athletes at Michigan do not deserve to get the same size M letter as the male athletes. And of course, everyone on earth shouted him down, and of course, female athletes at Michigan, male athletes at Michigan get the same size M. But there's a perfect example of my childhood just pouring my heart out for this man's team, and then to see what his true colors were inside as far as women athletes. That was a tough one, and I've mentioned it to him a few times, and he knows. And we obviously laugh about it now, but it wasn't funny.